Okay, so what if the path to true eternal happiness meant you had to give up, well, everything you hold dear? It's a pretty radical idea, right? Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating and, yeah, pretty controversial 1979 sermon by Reverend Sun Myung Moon that lays out exactly that path.
You know, we all chase happiness. But what if we're chasing the wrong thing? Or what if there are two totally different kinds of happiness? This sermon kicks things off by asking a really fundamental question. What exactly is eternal happiness? And how is it any different from, that temporary buzz we get from day to day?
And right away, the sermon draws a really clear line in the sand. On one side, you've got what it calls worldly happiness. Think of it as temporary, self-centered, basically just an accessory to life. But on the other side, that's eternal happiness, the kind that's lasting, God-centered, and, according to this text, the only real goal. This whole idea, this contrast, is the key to understanding everything else.
Okay, so if eternal happiness is the ultimate prize, you have to ask, where did humanity go so wrong? The first part of the sermon gets right into it, arguing that our entire history kicked off with one single catastrophic mistake.
And the sermon points to one single event as the source of all our problems. It calls this the fall. Now, this idea comes from Christian theology and is basically framed as the exact moment humanity's original connection to God was just severed. And that break is what supposedly started our entire history on a path of struggle instead of happiness.
And that leads us right into the next big idea here. God's struggle, man's choice. And this is where things get pretty cosmic. The sermon basically says that our everyday lives, they're the actual battlefield for a massive conflict between God and Satan.
So to make this easier to grasp, the sermon uses this really powerful metaphor. Picture humanity as a giant scale, and every single choice we make every day is like a little weight that tips that scale one way or the other, towards good or towards evil.
And that brings up a super important point. According to this, it's not actually what you do that matters most. It's the motivation behind it. This quote really nails it down. It says two people could be doing the exact same thing, but the history behind that action, whether it's for God or for yourself, is what makes it good or evil.
All right, so that brings us to the solution, which is laid out in this next section called the price of salvation. And I'll tell you right now, the path it lays out is pretty radical. It demands a whole lot more than just, believing in something.
The way the sermon explains it, a Messiah's mission is, by its very nature, supposed to be radical. The whole point isn't to make everyone feel comfortable with the world as it is. No, the point is to deny it completely, to force a total break from all our attachments to worldly stuff.
And man, this idea is driven home with some seriously stark language. The sermon quotes Jesus directly, saying, "I have not come to bring peace, but a sword." I mean, wow, that's a clear call for major disruption, not for comfort. And then, right after that, it hits you with another incredibly challenging line. "He who loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me." The message here couldn't be clear. This divine mission has to come before everything, absolutely everything. So where does all this lead? Well, it brings us to the practical side of things in a section called A Mission of Sacrifice. And this is where the sermon explains why suffering isn't just a bad thing to be avoided, but an absolutely essential test. The sermon just completely flips the script on the whole idea of persecution. In this worldview, it's not just random suffering. It's actually a necessary tool. It's like a fire that purifies you, makes you stronger, and ultimately proves how committed you really are. And this leads to this really wild process that the sermon basically calls your passport to heaven. It's a whole sequence of events. First, you have to face persecution from everyone. Then, you have to stay totally firm in what you believe. And then, and this is a really bizarre twist, Satan himself has to give you a certificate of approval before God will even let you in.
To really drive home just how important one particular test is, the sermon uses this analogy of a cosmic exam. And on this exam, there's one question that's worth a whopping 90 points. Are you willing to leave your family? That's it. That's the big one.
And this whole idea builds up to a pretty shocking claim. The sermon says that if a husband can give up his wife and children, have absolutely nothing left to lose, then Satan has no more claim on him. He's a free man. That sacrifice is presented as the ultimate, and I mean ultimate key to spiritual freedom. So, after all that sacrifice, what's the final step? What do you do? Well, the last section is called Building Your Own Heaven, and it shifts the focus from just personal sacrifice to a very real, hands-on community mission for followers.
And this entire mission is guided by one core principle. It's actually pretty simple. Anything that's centered on yourself is bad, but anything that's centered on a purpose beyond yourself is eternal and good. That's it. That's the moral compass for every single action.
So how do you put that principle into practice? Well, through a concept they call home church. And it's a very specific, tangible mission. Each member is given the spiritual responsibility for a small local area, exactly 360 homes, and their job is to teach and serve the people living there.
And the goals for this home church idea, they are huge. We're talking incredibly ambitious. It's all about recovering what the sermon says was lost: people, the country, even the spirit world. The whole point is to create a new foundation for God's love here on earth, expanding the heavenly kingdom one household at a time.
And that really brings us to the final, core challenge of the whole sermon. It leaves you with a very direct question. It asks, are you just going to sit around and wait for eternal happiness to come to you? Or are you going to get out there and actually build it?